Hi folks, Seth here. Thanks for watching my monologue. In these uncertain times, you may be thinking about personal protection. If you are, I urge you to visit my friends at Guns Etc. They'll help you find the perfect protection for yourself and your family, and they can even teach you how to use it. They've been protecting Arizonans for over 33 years, and they stand for the great principles this country was founded upon. Or you can just click on gunsetc.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back. Happy New Year. Happy Monday, January 4th, 2021. This year, 2021, can be the year of many different things. Resistance, a great accounting on governmental health and policy actions, more governmental health and policy actions, something we don't know about or see, something with another country militarily, maybe terrorism, a testing of a new administration. But if I had a wish, it would be, at least for us, something that helps address all of those things and anything else that might come up, a great relearning about conservatism. I'm in part put to mind on this from a call last month asking that we walk ourselves through what conservatism is and teaches, and we will do that. Because if it is a worldview, as we tell ourselves it is, there should be nothing under the sun that arises that conservatism as a political philosophy should not be able to address. I know there are a lot of traditions in the movement, from the libertarian to the traditional to that which we take from the English. I've always stood proudly myself with the Claremont Institute and thinking there was something unique about two things: A, our founding, and B, our conservatism, American conservatism, because it was meant to preserve our founding, preserve the revolution. For decades, a great many conservatives here looked to people like Edmund Burke of Great Britain or others from other European places like Hayek, for example, or Mises. But what of us? If we invoke the likes of Madison, Jefferson, and Lincoln, mightn't it also be not just because they were presidents, but because they were great teachers and articulators of conservatism? And if so, what was it they taught? I start with an old essay from Charles Kessler. Charles was in the graduating class at Harvard in 1978 and wrote this. The Harvard class of 1978 was, of course, the class that had Alexander Solzhenitsyn as its commencement speaker. Charles wrote, "It was surely the most compelling speech of the past decade when Solzhenitsyn declared that the United States had lost its civic courage. Another way of saying this would be that America has lost the courage of its convictions. But it is impossible to lose what we do not possess, and the real crisis of our times is the loss of confidence in what Americans' convictions and principles are. It should hardly come as a surprise that we find it difficult to decide what the U.S. ought to do in the world, since we cannot know what we want or need until it is that we know where we are." He wrote this just over 40 years ago and went on. American conservatism is in the same boat. Conservatism presupposes that there is something worth conserving, but we can hardly know what to conserve without knowing what America is and what it stands for. To be sure, no one can justly accuse conservatism of having lived an unexamined life over the past 2 generations, but a political movement cannot form itself around a Socratic declaration of ignorance, however ironic. A political movement cannot philosophize, but decent ones do have a need of philosophy. In his great book on the ancient regime, Tocqueville observes that it is altogether understandable for a badly governed nation to desire to govern itself instead. Quote, "But a desire for independence of this kind, stemming as it does from a specific removable cause, is bound to be short-lived. Once the circumstances giving rise to it have passed away, it languishes, and what at first sight seemed a genuine love of liberty proves to have been merely the hatred of a tyrant," close quote. American conservatism sometimes resembles that false love of liberty, its self-examinations concluding in nothing more lasting or noble than ad hoc reactions to liberalism and leftism. Think the New Deal and the Great Society and all that come from those programs. But this sort of poking around in the detritus of liberal social programs in the manner of, say, Uncovering Troy proves nothing except that manifest follies should be avoided. Historical sentimentalism in the face of the great changes wrought in American society since the New Deal will not provide conservatism with the meaning it is seeking, nor will root and branch libertarianism, which in its own way is also a reaction to the New Deal. What conservatism needs is an understanding of our political tradition that will free it from reaction and open it to action. Action for the sake of the genuine love of liberty is expressed in the principles of that tradition. What this understanding would mean is that conservatives would choose those principles again if they had the chance. In other words, conservatism's commitment to the past makes political sense only to the extent that it implies a commitment to the future. Conservatism, rightly understood, is less really a commitment to the past than a commitment to certain truths applicable to the past, but also the present and the future. Kessler goes on to speak of a uniquely American understanding and contribution to conservatism. Thus, if we are to preserve America as conservatives, we ought to know what it is about Americans we are here to preserve. And for that, we obviously must go to our founding. The Declaration and the Constitution each embody, in some sense, the principles of our revolution, but we need to make the relationship between them more clear. Which is the higher expression of those principles, and hence of the government and way of life that the Revolution established? Let us look at Abraham Lincoln's reflection on the relationship between the Declaration and the Constitution. It took the form of a meditation on Proverbs 25. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver. To Lincoln, the word fitly spoken was the assertion of principle in the Declaration of Independence. The pictures of silver were the Union and Constitution subsequently framed around it. The picture was made not to conceal or destroy the apple, but to adorn it and preserve it. Lincoln's task, of course, was to preside over the dissolution and reconstruction of the Union, and in so doing to affirm that a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal can long endure. Herr Jaffa points out that however admirable the character of the American Constitution, it was not the most admirable expression of the regime. The Constitution is the highest American thing only if one tries to understand the high in light of the low. It is high because men are not angels and because we do not have angels to govern us. But the Constitution, in deference to man's non-angelic nature, made certain compromises with slavery, as we know and must admit, and partly because of those compromises, it dissolved in the presence of a great crisis. Now let me pause to say or suggest that since issues of race and slavery are so much a part of the cause of modern-day politics and culture, again, perhaps it's worth thinking about our surrender, conservatives' surrender to our own principles and founding that created the vacuum in which these issues could rise and divide us yet again. The man who united the Declaration and Constitution to reify our commitment to our founding and its principles, Lincoln, rightly understood that we needed a new birth of freedom based upon his noble understandings of the Declaration's principles. A new birth of freedom because our nation was conceived in liberty. So a new birth that ended a great deal of misunderstanding about the role of nature, human beings, the human ethics of equality and freedom. Does anyone tie the notion of conceiving of a nation in liberty requiring a new birth of freedom? Lincoln led America through a new birth of freedom, through a spiritual rebirth, because the first birth, the founding, had certain defects, not merely because of the Constitution's compromises with slavery, but because of what those compromises represented. To Lincoln, slavery was the preeminent expression of human selfishness, of the evil to which men's passions could lead them. Constitutional compromises with slavery, however necessary, meant that American government had not been established on an entirely proper understanding of the relation between passion and freedom, which is not to say that the founders' handiwork was erroneous, only that it was insufficient or incomplete. The people had been taught, Jefferson taught them, to assert their rights, in other words, but they had not yet learned to respect what it was that they had asserted. Lincoln's effort to form public opinion on the truly Republican principles of our founding, the reconciliation of rights and passions, can be summed up in one of his most famous epigrams, "As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. This expresses my idea of democracy. Whatever differs from this to the extent of the difference is not democracy. To be free requires that men know and respect what it is that makes them free." This, of course, gets us to the issue of equality. Sometimes that issue causes an allergic reaction in conservative circles, but the allergy is based on a faulty understanding of equality, at least as our founders understood it. Equality, it must be remembered, is not equality of condition, of virtue, knowledge, strength, good looks, or anything else so unnatural, but rather equality of natural rights, of the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In this sense, equality is the same thing as liberty, inasmuch as men have a right to liberty only because they are born equal, that is, born without natural superiors. No man, Lincoln said, is good enough to govern another man without that other man's consent. As Harry Jaffa put it, liberty and equality are as inseparable as the concavity and convexity of a curved surface. Or, as I like to say, putting it another way, as inseparable as the up and down nature of a staircase. You can't really have one without the other, lest it not be a staircase or a curved surface. Who defends liberty, therefore, must defend equality. This is, I think, the whole cloth we American conservatives must start with in teaching, promoting, and understanding conservatism. Conservatives who understand this will see a conservatism that lies between the extremes of what we said, libertarianism and traditionalism. What is extreme about libertarianism is the insistence that freedom is the solution to all problems in human life. If only the government would get out of the way, problems would solve themselves via human freedom. But freedom is a matter of choice, and a people must choose well in order to establish and preserve it. But no people can choose well who do not understand their ability to choose and what gives them the rights of that freedom to choose, which is their innate human nature and all that comes with it and is implied by it. On the other extreme is traditionalism, which is essentially reverence for the past. The danger here is that it is unreasonable and unprincipled. It does not acknowledge any objective standard by which we may distinguish just from unjust, good from bad, true from false. Thus, an American conservatism rightly understood must point to a politics that prizes virtue more highly than does libertarianism and reason more highly than does traditionalism. This is step one to understanding American conservatism. Tomorrow I shall take up step two. Meantime, we have a lot to save here, so let's get to it this year.